secrets they keep. Who knew the South could hold such lore? Wicked tales on every floor. Sweet home Alabama, not so sweet no more. History's a wild one, crime galore. Through the hills and the haunted pines, truth gets twisted in the lines.
I'm here with Country Diggers. Welcome to the Speakeasy. Today we'll be reading out of the Wicked North Alabama book by Jacquelyn Procter Reeves, and I'll be telling you a little about the Jonestown cult, Jim Jones, and a man from North Alabama called Jerry Balisok. Okay, stay tuned. Okay, this is called The Last Word right here, but I'm going to call it Damn the State Department, okay? So, get on with the story. The Jonestown cult suicides attracted worldwide attention in the late fall of 1978. But when a Huntsville woman saw her son's body in one of the pictures of the tragedy, she vowed not to rest until his body was returned to Huntsville for burial. She paid for a gravesite and bought a tombstone. But for years, questions remained about who was actually buried in the Maple Hill Cemetery plot. This story begins on November 18th, 1976. Thousands of miles away, Reverend Jim Jones ordered the execution and suicide of over 900 people in the Jonestown commune near Guyana in South America. In the weeks that followed, the world learned details of the charismatic madman who started the People's Temple in Northern California. Jones brainwashed some 20,000 people and convinced them to turn over their worldly possessions and follow him to a secluded nirvana, which he egotistically named for himself. Jim Jones, the former director of the San Francisco Housing Authority, resigned his post under a dark cloud of controversy. To build a society that would regulate everyone to the same social status. That's what they're trying to do to us now. Their sacrifices in the meantime netted him millions of dollars in property and cash. When former members reported cases of abuse, people held against their will, and others who were killed if they disobeyed Jones. California Congressman Leo Ryan, along with an entourage of newsmen, went on a fact-finding trip to Jonestown. Once there, 9 cult members pleaded with Ryan to take them back to California. As they loaded into the small plane to return to the United States, one cult member pulled out a gun and opened fire. Truckloads of other cult members swiftly drove in from their hiding places in the jungle to finish off the attack. Congressman Ryan was killed along with 4 other people. Jones and the People's Temple were now threatened. Soon there would be police all around and Jones would go to prison. In a ritualistic act that had been rehearsed many times before, Jones ordered that everyone drink poison-laced punch. That's where the term drink the Kool-Aid came from. They drunk the Kool-Aid. Well, that's most people have drunk the Kool-Aid today, okay? But anyway, parents were instructed to give it to their children before ingesting it. themselves. There was evidence, however, that not everyone was willing to swallow the poison. Their bullet wounds were not self-inflicted. Among the millions of people who turned the pages of Life magazine to look at the gruesome pictures was Huntsville nurse Marjorie Balisok. To her horror, she recognized the lifeless faces of her son Jerry and his wife. She recognized the shirt on his body. It was one that she had bought him for him herself. The road that led Jerry Balisok to Jonestown was no less strange than the surreal deaths of over 900 people. As a youth, he had an interest in motorcycles and decided to open a motorcycle shop sometime after high school. His widowed mother took out a second mortgage on her Pansy Street home. Though at first the business seemed to do well, Jerry soon found himself unable to meet the financial obligations associated with owning a business. As the business began to slip, Jerry started to write bad checks. Oh, I need to mention that he was a professional wrestler from 1974 to 1977, performing as Mr. X, and a fugitive from 1977 to 1989, and a legal advocate in 1993 to 2013, okay? He was a man jack of all trades. He was a jack of all trades. But anyway, it didn't take long for the authorities to learn of his financial creativity. And he was indicted on 13 separate counts of forgery. Rather than face the charges and possible jail time, Jerry left town with his wife and family. A fugitive warrant was issued for his arrest. Through phone records and credit card bills, the authorities were able to trace Jerry and his family to Miami and the Bahamas. But because they could not find his exact location, they were unable to make an arrest. In December 1977, Jerry called his mother for the last time. He told her that he was headed to South America with a new identity. Marjorie Balisok was not an outgoing person. She was remembered by a former employee of Big Springs Cafe, which was at that time located near Russell Erskine Hotel. Marjorie rode her bicycle to the cafe every morning for breakfast, on her way to work, and stopped again for supper on her way home. She was polite but did not go out of her way to get to know people. All of that changed when she lost her son. Mrs. Balisok wanted her son's body back home for burial. Every move she made, however, seemed to be frustrated by government bureaucracy. In these years before DNA testing, government officials were understandably reluctant to release a body without absolute positive identification. Because the bodies had bloated in the hot sun, exacerbated by the effects of the poison, their condition made it almost impossible to identify them. No one seemed willing to take a mother's word. Mrs. Balisok was notified that Jerry's body might be released to another family. She intensified her efforts by firing off letters to Senator Hal Heflin, numerous federal officials, and news reporters. A 1980 story in the Huntsville Times ran the picture she identified, as well as the heartbreak of her struggle. She even suggested that her son's picture be shown to Jonestown survivors to prove that he was there. Excuse me. Her request was denied on the grounds that officials felt it might be construed as harassment. She was denied help everywhere she turned. Many people, including Senator Jacquelyn, wondered how anyone could possibly be identified in the blurry photograph. Living in a small apartment on Brandon Street, Jerry Balisok became an expert on the events of the Jonestown massacre, as well as the life of Jim Jones. Her son had once called her from Puerto Rico, asking for a sum of money that coincided with the amount required by Jim Jones to become a member of his cult. She had already been warned by federal officials not to help him elude authorities in any way. In her search, Mrs. Balisok was able to tie Jim Jones to business dealings in Puerto Rico, establishing yet another connection between her son and the cult leaders. It was suggested by some officials that Mrs. Balisok wanted to have her son declared dead so that charges against him would be dropped. Was this some elaborate and convenient scheme to keep him out of jail? She said that she would have preferred to see him alive and in prison, but there was no doubt in her mind that Jerry was dead. The insurance policies in his name would have been only enough to cover his burial expenses. It certainly wasn't a grand scheme to collect insurance money. Mrs. Balisok took her cause to wherever she could get public interest and support. She was interviewed by several publications over the years, and many wondered how she could be so certain that Jerry was involved in the Jim Jones cult. In her extensive research, she also must have learned that Jim Jones appealed to people who drifted in no apparent direction. In one interview, she said that Jonestown was the only place her son could go. Mrs. Balisok's tenacity drew the attention of several other interested agencies. Jerry owned American Express, $10,000, along with many people who had received his bad checks. They were as certain that he was alive as Mrs. Balisok was that he was dead. Without positive proof of his death, they wanted the case kept open. Victims of the Jonestown massacre were taken to Dover, Maryland, for possible identification. Because of decomposition, many could not be identified and were taken to Oakland, California, for burial in a common grave some 6 months later. According to a local acquaintance, Marjorie was in California waiting when the victims' bodies were removed from the plane. Her intention was to intercept her son's body and bring him home for burial. She was determined. She told officials at Dover that her son wasn't much of a person, but he was my son. I want his body so I can bury him. After endless struggles, there seemed to be closure to the case. In a final act of love, she had a monument placed over his plot at Maple Hill Cemetery. Bitter and angry at the authorities who seemed to put roadblocks in her path, she had her frustrations carved into the headstone. The words, "Damn the State Department," serve as a reminder to everyone of a woman's determination to have the last word. Satisfied that Jerry Balisok was dead, the authorities dropped the outstanding charges against him. A few years later, on May 23rd, 1983, confident that she had done all she could for her son, Marjorie Balisok finally found the peace that had eluded her in life. She died and was buried next to her son's plot. On the warm spring day of her funeral, men who had never known Marjorie Balisok were among the mourners. FBI agents mingled in the crowd, hopeful that Jerry Balisok would come to say one final farewell to his mother. He was not there. The story might have ended there if not for a phone call to local police in 1989 asking for information about Jerry Balisok. He was presumed dead. The Huntsville authorities answered, but that was not the case. He was in jail in Seattle, Washington. The story quickly unfolded. In the 1970s, Jerry and his family had moved to Renton, Washington, where he assumed the identity of a man named Ricky VITA. Jerry, aka Ricky, had worked at several places, including Boeing Company, and had been fired from one job when it was discovered that he had lied on his employment application. Unbelievably, he claimed to have been a graduate of Cambridge University. Jerry then drifted into one investment scheme or another until his 1989 arrest for shooting Emmett Thompson in Seattle, Washington. In spite of being shot 3 times in the back of the head and once in the arm while they were supposedly doing target practice in the woods, Thompson had survived. Thompson told King County Police that VITA wanted him dead because he knew of VITA's plot to have his Winnetachee Hotel burned for the insurance money. VITA claimed that he shot Thompson in self-defense. When Thompson threatened him with a knife, was unconvincing, and he was charged with attempted murder. Okay, if you shoot somebody, let's see, when he shot this guy 3 times in the back of the head and once in the arm. 3 times in the back of the head ain't self-defense. I'm sorry, but that ain't self-defense. Okay. Ricky VITA's fingerprints were run through the FBI database when it was suspected that he was using an alias. The FBI made the startling discovery that the man held in charges of attempted murder was Huntsville's own Jerry Balisok. The real Ricky VITA was living in Florida. On March 9th, 1990, amended charges were filed against him in King County Superior Court, naming him as Jerry Balisok. On April 9th, 1990, a King County, Washington jury found Jerry Balisok guilty of attempted murder in the first degree with criminal intent. He was given a 20-year sentence and fined $530.02. Although he appealed the verdict, it was upheld on February 14th, 1994. So, who is buried in Maple Hill Cemetery under the tombstone intended for Jerry Balisok? No one. The grave is empty. In spite of Marjorie Balisok's determination, she was never able to convince authorities that it was her son's body in the picture in Life magazine. In Huntsville's peaceful and beautiful Maple Hill Cemetery is a gravestone that causes more than a few curious people to wonder about the story behind the strange words and remembered the actions of a madman in the late fall of 1978. But for all the evil that Jim Jones inspired, this is one event he cannot claim credit for. Jerry Balisok, born September 8, 1955, murdered in Guyana, November 13, 1978, buried in Oakland, California, May 1979. Damn the State Department. All right, but I looked further, and it seems Jerry, after his prison sentence, he went to, I think it was Valenzuela. He went to Valenzuela, and there he married, and he was arrested again on sexual assault charges, and he died of a heart attack or stroke then at age 58, I think, and in 2013. So that was a weird story. He was like a jack of all trades right there, a con man. But interesting stuff. All right. Hope you enjoyed. Bye.